If you're a Cadillac fan, then perhaps the 1970 Sedan Deville that you see here is familiar to you. The 1970 Sedan Deville would be the last year of the 1965 to 1970 body style. Of course, there have been some significant revisions over that period of time. The car went from having stacked headlamps in 1965 to the quad horizontal headlamps for the 1969 model year. And then the 1969 Cadillac was slightly refined with a few different details for the 1970 model year, some of which we'll talk about in a little bit. But there were a number of variants and quite a few different Cadillacs that were available in 1970. There was, of course, the DeVille series, which came in the Coupe DeVille as well as the Sedan DeVille. There was the Fleetwood Brougham, which was a four-door only pillared vehicle, so four-door pillared sedan. Then there was the Eldorado, the two-door coupe, and this was also the last year for the 1967 to 70 Eldorado generation before it would be revamped for the 1971 model year. And then at the very low end of the spectrum, the entry-level Cadillac, the Calais, of course, was there for those buyers who really wanted that Cadillac but didn't want many options or couldn't afford them. And of course, if you wanted a limousine, there was the Fleetwood 75 limousine. But let's stick to the passenger cars that were typically bought during this time. Now, when it comes to the four-door vehicles, most people recall the hardtop Sedan Deville that I showed before. There's no B-pillar on it. It has four doors. Or the Coupe DeVille with the two doors and was also a hardtop. And most people recall the Fleetwood Brougham that I mentioned, the four-door pillared sedan. But one vehicle that seems to be forgotten about in the lineup is the 1970 Sedan Deville. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in the brochure, as you can see here, the Sedan Deville was actually the vehicle, a four-door Deville, that had a B-pillar. Yes, Cadillac still had Sedan Devilles with B-pillars, and this would be the last year for the pillared four-door Sedan Deville. If you got a hardtop Sedan Deville, it was actually called hardtop Sedan Deville in the brochure, as you see here. So the regular old Sedan Deville was actually a four-door pillared sedan. And I think this is a forgotten about model in the Cadillac lineup. Most of us are familiar with the 1970 Coupe, the 1970 hardtop Sedan Deville, the Fleetwood Brougham, but not this pillared four-door vehicle. Now let's take a look at the brochure picture from the 70 Cadillac brochure of the Sedan Deville. You can see here the B-pillar. The windows are down in this particular photo. And the car kind of looks relatively nondescript here and inoffensive. It's got the vinyl roof on it. And, it's one of those variants that if you just looked at it in the brochure, you would say, well, ho-hum, it looks okay, doesn't look bad. But I'm going to be more interested in the Coupe DeVille or the hardtop Sedan Deville because this doesn't look really all that interesting. I have to say the 1970 Cadillac and the 69 had to have been designed to just show off the car's sheer size from any angle. I mean, first of all, when the car was redesigned for 1969, that gaping grille was just enormous and is in your face. You also have that big elevated surface there right above the grille, the so-called prow on the Cadillac hood, where you have a relatively low surface in between the fender peak and the midpoint of the hood. And it's just a Cadillac trait that was around for many, many years. Makes that front end even look more massive with these huge vertically tall fender tips as well. And then if you look at the various details and surfacing on the side of the car, again, it's just made to effectively enunciate the overall massiveness of this vehicle. There's no lower rocker moldings on these cars, which would have been very typical of luxury cars for the era, just kind of a distinctive piece of jewelry, but they don't exist here. And the effect is that it really makes the overall body side look even larger because there's nothing that's just reflecting the ground or that's not painted on these cars. You see the whole body side. And then, of course, you have this massive fin that begins partway through the rear door and continues on rearward. Again, a huge fin that adds to the vertical height. And then you'll also notice that the A-pillars and the roof the A-pillar is relatively short and the roof is relatively low. So the effect is that the overall body on these vehicles just looks massive. Now this is a picture of a hardtop Sedan Deville, but it's the best one that I can find, and it's a good color to really show off the side surfacing, which I think is beautiful on this car. Notice that surface that really begins at the front of the fender and then continues on. As it continues on rearward in the car, kind of dives downward at the same time that new fin starts appearing partway through the rear door. Just a beautiful execution. But you'll notice here, as I said, there's no rocker moldings on this vehicle. And the body side just looks massive. The body tucking in at the rockers starts relatively low on this vehicle. And the door glass is relatively small. There's not much glass area here on the side, again, because the body is so tall and large. And that's just accentuated, I think, as well by this relatively small wheel arch. It's almost a diminutive wheel arch given the size of the fender. Think about the Oldsmobile Tornado wheel arch relative to the size of the fender there, which was also pretty big. But this one is almost designed to make, again, that fender look massive on its own by visually shrinking the wheel arch itself. And, of course, it goes without saying that has to be one of the largest cornering lights, if not the largest cornering light that Cadillac has ever put on a vehicle. That is just enormous, as well as the bumper that wraps over into the side. Although it's beautifully sculpted and picks up, notice the wheel arch in the upper portion of the bumper and then kind of continues it forward on the car in a very handsome way. Now, I wanted to discuss the styling of the 70 Sedan Deville a little bit with those pictures because I don't have great pictures of a pillared 1970 Sedan Deville. There are plenty of pictures out there of ones with vinyl tops, but I needed to show you one without a vinyl top because this is where the sculpture on the car really comes alive, and you don't get any of this detail if there's a vinyl top on the car. So this is a 1970 Sedan Deville. Somebody's obviously added an aftermarket Chimsel or center high mounted stop lamp here to the deck lid. Why, I don't know, but that should not be there. But take a look at that upper section of this vehicle and the roof in particular. If this isn't a work of General Motors styling beauty, I don't know what is. You have this beautiful crease that runs from the A-pillar all the way back near the backlight on the roof. And then that crease, which is relatively sharp, also just beautifully and gracefully comes down that area near the backlight and integrates itself into the deck lid. And then look at how from this rear three-quarter view, that line just fades out gradually into oblivion. I mean, what an awesome piece of sculpture. Imagine this car in clay, and you can imagine somebody just sculpting that. And then you have that crease that's very sharp, and you can contrast it with some other elements on the vehicle. Notice that you have this filleted area underneath the backlight. In other words, it's a concave surface. It's a relatively dull surface. It's not a sharp crease, but that just contrasts with how sharp that crease is and reflects the light in a different way. And you also have on the back portion of the roof there just this beautiful radius. In other words, a convex surface that's up there. Again, slightly dull, certainly more dull than that crease line that I was talking about that runs from the A-pillar and then goes down the C-pillar and folds into the deck lid there beautifully. And the combination of that radius at the top and the fillet at the bottom is just an absolutely gorgeous look for this vehicle that you don't get any sense for that. No sense for the crease, no sense for the radius, no sense for the fillet when you've got a vinyl top. And this is one of the reasons why designers loathe, in general, vinyl top cars, especially on cars like this that have just beautiful sculpture. Now let's transition to another photo. I wish this were a better photo, but this is the only car I can show this to you. And so I hope you'll just bear with me because it really shows off the sculpture of this car. But notice here in more of a dead-on rear view, obviously we're offset a little bit. Remember I was talking about that firm crease line that came down off the roof, down the C-pillar, and then when you were looking at the car from the rear three-quarter view or a side view, that line would just fade out because it would drop below the quarter panel peak there, the fin peak. But as you look at this car from more of a dead-on view, you notice that that line actually continues all the way through the deck lid and then creates this beautiful surface in between the fin and the larger portion of the deck lid. And it goes all the way, actually even most of the way down the deck lid as it folds over and mates with the bumper. So the designers have really made this car come alive as you walk around it and you see different things that are revealed to you as you go from that side view to the rear three-quarter view to the rear view, you would never know that there's that surface there on the deck lid unless you walked around to the rear of the car and had a chance to see it. Now let me show you another version of this car. This is actually a 1969 Cadillac, but relatively similar. And this is a pillared Sedan Deville with a vinyl roof. And notice here that vinyl roof is just covering most of that beautiful sculpture that we just talked about. But oh well. That's why you have to get one of these cars without a vinyl roof when there's such beautiful sculpture going on. Now, unfortunately, that beautiful sculpture didn't really extend to the interior on these 1970 DeVilles. You can see here these cars got a new instrument panel for 1969, and it was okay. It wasn't anything that was particularly exciting. By this point, unfortunately, the materials the Cadillac was using, you can see there's faux burl wood grain on the dash, which was not atypical during this time frame, but it just wasn't convincing in its quality. And the dash doesn't really have anything that's all that exciting about it. It's just kind of this flat thing, and it was done in part for safety reasons. This was the so-called safety instrument panel, but it just doesn't have much visual theater to it here on the inside. Even the door panels are not all that exciting relative to the Cadillacs of prior years. And I think that's probably the most unfortunate thing about the 1970 DeVille. And I would say that the 1971 model year Cadillac, the interior would continue down this downgrade path, unfortunately. But the 70 Sedan DeVille with that pillared sedan look and without the vinyl roof, I think is absolutely gorgeous. Now, one great thing that you did get when you bought one of these Cadillacs was the engine under hood. And this was the Cadillac exclusive 472 cubic inch V8 that made 375 horsepower, 525 foot-pounds of torque in the 1970 Cadillacs. You could, of course, get the first year of the 500 cubic inch V8, 8.2 liters, if you got an Eldorado. And the 500 was an Eldorado exclusive for the 1970 model year and into the 1970s for a number of years before. In 1975, every Cadillac just got the 500 and the 472 was eliminated. But these cars actually are endowed, consequently, with relatively sprightly acceleration. I will say the part throttle tip-in maybe isn't all that convincing, but when you really jam on the accelerator on these, they really come to life. And this big, massive vehicle picks up speed with a level of acceleration that I think you'll be surprised by. And it does so with a level of smoothness and refinement. I don't know about anybody else, but I find that if these cars have been really well kept and they've been run at least for some time, if they haven't been stored for an overly long period of time, the engines are silky smooth. Sometimes, though, they are a little bit susceptible if they've been sitting for extended periods of time, just like any other old engine, to a little bit of idle shake, I will say. Maybe the Cadillac V8's more so than others. I don't know if that's because maybe the valves don't seal all that well. If they've been sitting for a long time, they get a little rusty or something. But if the car has been used and the engine has been well maintained, oh my goodness. I mean, just whisper silent acceleration from the engine's under hood and from this high compression, the last year for the high compression, 472 cubic inch V8 before it would become a low compression engine to run on unleaded or low lead fuel in 1971. So I hope you enjoy this little exposition of the styling and a little bit of the tribute to the pillared, forgotten four-door Sedan Deville for 1970. If you enjoyed this, what did you think about the styling? Put a comment in the comment section. Do you agree with me on my styling assessment or do you disagree? Let me know. Thanks again for watching.